Well, howdy there, Internet people. It's Bo again. So, today we're going to talk about what causes countries to deviate from the playbook. Why sometimes they don't use the manual, even though they know what the manual says. After that last video on the truckers, a whole bunch of people started asking, well, if they know it and they're using this playbook now, why didn't they use it in these other situations? The most commonly cited, coming from people in Canada, are situations involving Indigenous causes, right? And the answer is simple. The same reason the United States didn't use the playbook when dealing with BLM. The obvious answer, the one that you see right away, is, well, racism. And yeah, that's part of it. The more developed answer is racism and capitalism. Big bucks involved, right? That's also true. And then there's the thing that really kind of cinches how much force these powers that be are going to be willing to use. And that's whether or not that movement is an actual threat to the status quo. Let's think about our truckers in Canada for a second. They are, for lack of a better word, irrelevant. As far as the status quo is concerned, they're irrelevant. They don't matter at all. You're talking about a country that is what, 85% vaxxed? Something like that. It's really high. Canada enjoys a high vaccination rate, right? And currently, we are on what most expect to be the downslope of the pandemic, right? So much so that a whole bunch of jurisdictions are lifting their restrictions without protests. Australia opening up its borders. The truckers don't matter to the status quo, to the powers that be. The truckers are irrelevant. Let's say something happens and they get their way. Oh no, we open up immediately and there's more capitalism. There's more money, right? And that money tends to flow to those at the top. They don't bother anybody. They are irrelevant from the status quo's position. Canada and the United States aren't that different. If the powers that be up there thought that they could get away with just letting it run wild and maintaining the economy at full speed, they would have. But they knew that that would have been just a little bit too far in the court of public opinion, right? So, in essence, the trucker thing that's going on, it doesn't matter. These restrictions, all of this stuff will be eventually be relaxed over time, with or without protest. It doesn't matter to those in power. So, what about the Indigenous causes? Is that the same? No, because they're advocating for real change. They're advocating for things that are not in line with the status quo. Right now, all the truckers are trying to paint themselves as like, trying to undermine everything and fight back against the powers that be. No, you're doing exactly what they want you to do. However, with Indigenous causes, let's just take one of the more prominent ones, defending water from pipelines, right? Yeah, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money that's going to be made by big and powerful companies that have big and powerful friends in government. It also would require more of a shift to greener energies. It disrupts the status quo. It's an actual threat. The racism, yeah, that makes it easier for them to really clamp down, because racism is normally targeted at groups that don't have institutional power. They don't have a lot of power and they don't have a lot of numbers. So as long as they can convince members of the majority group that it's okay, or to at least look the other way when that force is used, well, then they can use it. That's what it's about. The reason it historically gets visited upon marginalized groups is because A, they're smaller in number. Therefore, they're easier to scapegoat. Therefore, they're easier for the powers that be to turn the populace against them in the court of public opinion. They don't have the institutional power to stand back, and most importantly, to fight back, I'm sorry. They don't have the institutional power to fight back. But most importantly, marginalized groups tend to be on the right side of history. And they're calling for real change, deep change, change that would upset the status quo. That is when you see the powers that be overreact. That's when you see them decide to crush it rather than go through the playbook. It's because they actually want to change the system, not just protest in favor of the system. That's the difference. And if you look back historically to situations where the government overreacted, that's what you're going to find. Generally speaking, you're talking about dynamics that have a lot of variables, so there's always going to be exceptions. But normally, that's the formula that you will find. You will find it questions making money, and it upsets the status quo, and the people being targeted are marginalized. They're easy to turn the populace against. This is why, if you are part of the majority group, so if you're in the US or Canada, and you are white, this is why it's important for you to show up. Because the more of those faces that are in that crowd, the harder it is to turn public opinion against them. The harder it is to use that latent racism that exists in most Western societies. Because if it's all there, if you have this collective group of people, and if you have those white faces in that crowd, it makes it harder to use that tactic. It makes it harder to paint it as these other people are doing it. They're not like us, because there are people like us, quote, in the crowd. If you ever needed a reason to show up, that's it. Because you can actually, just your presence can help tone down the response from the powers that be. Anyway, it's just a thought. Y'all have a good day.